Well, good morning. Tony Virtue speaking here, Virtue and Partners, with our regular monthly update. Quite an inflection point actually in the markets at the moment. We obviously had that very tricky few weeks just before Christmas. Markets, as I explained last month, rebounded strongly, and here we are at the end of the quarter when we're actually above where we were before. So while that recovery is welcome, what we're seeing now is that the US Reserve have now said they're not going to lift interest rates for at least 12 months. That's quite a turnaround, to be frank. And we're actually seeing the bond yield curve invert. What that means in English is that the earnings that you would get on a 2-year bond are greater than a 10-year bond. That infers a few things. It infers possibly a recession, but certainly a slowdown. It also infers that the government will drop interest rates. And that will be both in the US, and we see a very similar pattern here in Australia at the moment. So if you look at our own yield curve, we're actually seeing that there could be a 50 basis points drop over the next 12 months. So a couple of ways of looking at that. You can say, well, that's really terrific. We can borrow money cheaply, we can buy up other companies, we can borrow long. So that's all kind of positive for the equity markets. On the negative side, you might say, well, that means you only drop rates if things aren't looking so good. So perhaps be careful. I think the reality is somewhere in the middle, and as I describe in my work here, part of the reason that we're seeing this deflation is the improvement in products and services that are a lot cheaper. So many of us are now using your Netflix, your Spotify's on a monthly subscription, obviously a lot cheaper than previous alternatives. It's meaning everyone's having a better life and it's costing less to do it. Now, if you look at that from an economy as a whole, the net effect of that is actually deflationary, but people are getting more bang for their buck. And in probably areas that are even more important, we're seeing improvements now in medicine. We have a number of clients who really were ill, who have made massive recoveries based on new technology coming through. So I think we should look at this as the best of times rather than the worst of times, and see what is the purchasing power of our money as opposed to what we've actually got in our pocket. Now, one of the keys to this prosperity going forward is obviously China. It's amazing to think that China's growth in 1 year is greater than the entire Australian GDP. Quite extraordinary there. Obviously, they've got 1.5 billion people. We have 25 million. And at the moment, they've stimulated their economy. As you can see in my notes, the Shanghai market doing quite a lot better. So that wealth effect is coming through in their spending. Iron ore prices are strong. Now, the effect of that, obviously, BHP, Rio, Fortescue doing well on the back of that. That means the tax take is strong on the back of that. We'll see how strong next week. We have the federal budget, last one before the federal election on Tuesday, and they promised us faithfully that there'll be a surplus for the first time in 10 years. Now, that's primarily because we're getting more for our exports rather than any great sort of micromanagement down here, but let's take it anyway. The reality is we're part of a global economy. We're regarded as a relatively safe haven, and while ever the rest of the world is sort of progressing, then that's basically a good news story for here. I couldn't stop without saying a few words about Brexit. I'll be over in London in a couple of weeks' time. None of us know exactly how this is going to play out, but it does look like a train wreck. At this stage, there hasn't been a lot of volatility in their markets. It's kind of everyone is so sort of bored with the whole process over so long that they've kind of had time to adjust to this. But I think the next monthly newsletter may actually be from London, so I can show you straight up what's happening there. So look, I think that obviously people are going to be careful until we have the federal election, which is going to be mid-May. The New South Wales election, I think it was a surprise. The Liberals won with an absolute majority. That is probably a strong message for Sydney. It's probably good for getting infrastructure completed. It's a fixed 4-year term, so at least we can plan around that and make decisions. So I would think that's a net positive for Sydney property. That with interest rates coming off and still strong net migration, it's this difficult thing called confidence, and the public quite rightly will wait till they can see positive trends before they invest, but we've seen how the equity markets turned around, and I could see something similar in the property markets. Certainly we are lending money a lot easier now than we were a few months ago, and the banks are loosening things, APRA is loosening things, and I think it's pretty clear to all of us that they went far too hard, and so hopefully now we'll get a rebound in what's happening there. So that's enough for today, and I'll be in touch from London. Tony Virtue, where experience pays.